All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. The New York Mets began this season like a contender as they were 14-7 through their first 21 games, which had them neck and neck with the Atlanta Braves for the top spot in the National League East. But since then, the Mets have been sputtering all over the baseball diamond as they've gone 4-12 in their last 16, which includes losing each of their last five series. And after dropping today's series finale against the Cincinnati Reds, New York is now 7.5 games behind the first place Atlanta Braves. Now, you can have your pick of the litter, if you will, as far as how things are going for the Mets right now. And at the end of the day, it's just not that good in any phase of the game. New York has already been shut out 7 times this season, and it's not even Memorial Day. So far, this Mets offense is 14th in the National League in hits, 13th in batting average, 11th in runs scored, and 11th in slugging. The pitching has not been that good either. And the pitching was supposed to be a strength of this team, especially the starting pitching. But we're talking about Mets pitching staff right now that has a team ERA of 4.71, which is 11th in the National League, while their six quality starts are dead last. Kodai Senga was one of the big signings for the Mets this season from Japan. He's 4-2 so far with an earned run average of 4.14, and he basically has not been able to get to the seventh inning throughout his rookie season with the Mets. And I say this because before the season began, I said advantage Senga through probably the first 2 months of the season due to the fact that the MLB pitchers were not familiar with him. He would have an advantage going through the league a couple of times, but that has not been the case. Even in the first inning, he has struggled at times. It's one of those, if he's not getting his fastball over, you know what? It's been batting practice. And we saw that again early in his start with the Cincinnati Reds. Max Scherzer has been oft injured throughout his brief Mets tenure. That is once again the case this year. He's 2-2 with a 5.56 ERA. Has not been the same since he came back from the suspension. It sounds like he's trying to pitch through an injury right now. And for me, I'm not sure if Scherzer is really going to be healthy throughout the year. And Scherzer was supposed to be a big part, and is still expected to be a big part of this Mets rotation. But then again, he's not eating up innings. Justin Verlander finally got into the rotation, had a shaky first inning in his first start with the Tigers, settled down throughout the rest of that start after that, and gave the Mets 7 good solid innings last night as they got the 2-1 win over the Cincinnati Reds. And if you're the Mets, obviously you hope that it's going to be vintage Verlander for you, and they're going to need vintage Verlander right now, as he's probably going to have to carry this rotation. No Carlos Carrasco, of course, because he's out with the injury. No Jose Quintana. He's yet to pitch this year for the Mets. And of course, if you're the Mets and you could somehow stay afloat, you get these guys healthy in the second half of the season, you do have an opportunity possibly to make some noise. The Mets so far have weathered the storm with the Edwin Diaz injury. I expected it, probably Dave Robertson to get more of the closing opportunities he has. And it's been a bullpen by committee. But if your starters are not going deep into contests like the Met starters have been so far, at some point it's going to tax your bullpen. You don't want to keep having to run those guys out there on a night in and night out basis, which the Mets are doing right now. CJ, what's going on, my man? I know that you're loving this right now. The Braves have been able to put some distance between themselves and the rest of the pack in the NL East, and I'm going to touch on that for the whole NL East picture before I finish off tonight. But then, you look at this Mets lineup as well. And, I said it before the season, and of course, a lot of other people said it as well. The Mets missed an opportunity to pick up another bat during the offseason. They were hopeful that I was going to be Carlos Correa. Obviously, it didn't work out. But then on top of that, Carlos Correa really hasn't been doing a lot so far with the Minnesota Twins. I felt personally the Mets should have gone out there and tried to have gotten, JD Martinez would have been a solid DH for them, in my opinion, behind a Pete Alonso in that lineup because they do need that protection. And it only took the Dodgers to give JD Martinez 10 million for 1 year to get it done. But you know what? The Mets have a hole right there. But overall, they're not hitting. After the strong start, Pete Alonso is only batting 234. Francisco Lindor is only batting 223 right now. Jeff McNeil, after leading the National League in batting last year, is just batting just 269 right now. Starling Marte and Mark Canha are just batting 217 each. This ain't going to get it done. The Mets finally called up Brett Beatty. He's getting his legs under him. You could see the progress with a young Francisco Alvarez as well. And in my opinion, the Mets need to get those two guys as many at bats as possible. But there is still a hole in this lineup. And of course, a lot of finger pointing, of course, is going to fall into the lap of general manager Billy Epler, because you have an owner in Steve Cohen who gave you basically a blank check to go out there and make this thing happen. And so far, it's not happening for the Metropolitans. One thing I will say, Buck Showalter, you got a veteran manager. He's kind of seen it all throughout his career as a skipper in the Major League Baseball. And I think, right now we're seeing several veteran managers around Major League Baseball that definitely are going to be Hall of Famers. Buck Showalter is definitely in that mix. Dusty Baker as well. And then, of course, I was surprised to see Bruce Bochy come back, but nonetheless, he's going to be there. But anyway, getting back to Buck Showalter, um, it's one of those where I feel like, he's one of the best in the business as far as his era of managing, as far as getting his team prepared on a daily basis to go out there and play. The bottom line is the Mets are just not executing right now. They're not scoring runs. They're not getting quality pitching. And when it's all said and done, this is why you have a team that has tapered off. Now, for the Mets' sake, obviously, the Major League Baseball season is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And with that said, you got 162 games to try to get this thing figured out. And of course, the other thing that helps the Mets, like a lot of other teams, is the additional postseason slots. The Mets right now, they're 7.5 games behind the Braves. And of course, the Braves are dealing with their own issues as well. CJ, you talked about it with Max Freed going to the disabled list. I know they call it the IL. I still call it the disabled list. Call me an old school guy. That's what I grew up on. But nonetheless, there's a hole right there for them. But obviously, they have a cushion right now over the rest of the division. You're talking about a 6.5 game lead over the Miami Marlins. I think at some point the Marlins are going to taper off. The teams I think that you got to look out for as far as being postseason teams out of the East, outside of Atlanta, definitely got to be both New York and Philadelphia. And of course, Philadelphia is 7 behind the Braves right now, while the Mets are 7.5. But remember, last year it was the Mets who got off to that hot start, but it was the Braves who caught them for the division championship. They just little by little, it's kind of like the old Pac-Man game, if you will. It's kind of piece by piece, and they got to them by season's end. And then of course, in the case of the Phillies, they started off slow last year. Joe Girardi got fired. They made Rob Thompson the interim manager. The Phillies got going down the stretch. They snuck in at the last minute to the playoffs, and then of course the rest is history as they went on to win the pennant. So the point that I'm trying to make is it's really not panic time if you're the Mets, but you still want to go out there and find a way to play better. Obviously, better than you've been in your recent stretch. You got a scenario where you dropped the series at home against the Washington Nationals after you came back from a very solid West Coast trip. Then you dropped the series against the Braves. Then after that, getting swept on the road by the Tigers, dropping another series at home against Colorado, and then dropping 2 out of 3 to the Cincinnati Reds, and the offense hasn't been there. Again, you've already been shut out 7 times, and that's not going to get it done. The bats got to get going. The pitching has to get going. This team has to get going. You're going to have people in the New York area that are definitely always looking to push the panic button and say, well, this person has to go, that person has to go. Buck Showalter's not going anywhere. Billy Epler's not going anywhere. I could foresee a situation for the Mets, maybe a position coach, a bench coach, somebody like that is let go in order to kind of like maybe potentially light a fire under this team. And of course, with the way that Major League Baseball is currently structured with the expanded postseason, less teams are going to be sellers at the deadline, which means that more than likely you're going to have to make do with what you have until at least, maybe you see a seller towards the trade deadline. Is there anything that anybody would want from the Oakland A's right now? Obviously, you would think that they would be sellers. I doubt it. Maybe a Chicago White Sox if they're out of it. The St. Louis Cardinals are surprising people with their slow start. Maybe they would be sellers. But at the end of the day, if you're the Mets, you have to make do with what you have. You got a 4-game set coming up on the road against the Washington Nationals. This was a team that just dominated you in your park. And after that, it does not get easy. You host the Tampa Bay Rays for 3, and Tampa Bay, they're looking like world beaters right now. Then after that, you host the Cleveland Guardians, and this is another team that's looking to get back on track. And then if you're the Mets, you have a road trip after that, 3 in Chicago with the Cubs, and the Cubs are showing signs of being an improving team this year, and 3 against the Colorado Rockies in Denver. And this is a team that just embarrassed you at Citi Field. So I'm not going to say it's make or break time for the Mets, but they definitely want to start showing some signs because at the end of the day, as bad as the Mets have been, they're only a game out of the final wild card spot in the National League, and it's still very early. CJ, you're calling for Rays, Braves in the World Series. Uh, Possibility. I mean, obviously, it's still May. A lot of things have to happen. But the way that the Rays have definitely played so far, they are looking like the team to beat in the American League, at least. But nonetheless, with the Mets, they've definitely got to figure this out. You look at the East right now and the NL, like I said, the Braves have given themselves a solid cushion right now. Obviously, it's also a cushion to help them due to the fact that they have injuries as well. But the Mets, they just got to get it going. There's no other way around it. So I think the next 30 to 40 days are going to be very telling as far as how this season is going to go for the Mets. And if they're unable to get things turned around, we could be talking about a sequel of the worst team that money could buy, which could be 31 years in the making. Of course, Bob Clappish, famously wrote that book after, the 92 Mets went out there and spent a lot of money and they were supposed to contend with the Pirates that year for first place in the old National League East. And obviously that was not the case. We saw the Mets throw around a ton of money in the offseason, some to retain their own players, some to go out there and get free agents. Look good at the beginning, but they have tapered off. But then again, the Mets do have some injuries as well. So let's see if they can pick it up for their sake and try to get this thing turned around. Like I said before, the MLB season is a marathon, not a sprint. But if you're the Mets, you definitely want to try to pick up your play sooner rather than later. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. CJ, as always, it was a pleasure to have you chiming in. I'll definitely have some more baseball to talk about over this weekend. So definitely keep your eyes and ears peeled, and I will definitely alert you of that. And as always, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off and saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.